The excavator's bucket hung over my vines like a guillotine, diesel breath rolling across my driveway, and I remember thinking, this is how grief gets robbed a second time. Not with a funeral, not with a hospital bill, but with a woman in a blazer clutching a clipboard like it's a badge and a weapon at the same time. Constance Holloway, the self-crowned queen of Canyon Ridge Homeowners Guild, had been running our little desert neighborhood like her personal kingdom for nearly 3 decades. And that morning she showed up with heavy machinery to teach me a lesson, as if my life hadn't already taught me everything the hard way. My name is Miles Tatum. I did 20 years as a Marine combat engineer, the kind of job where you learn to read structures, weaknesses, pressure points. You learn that the loudest person in the room is usually standing on something unstable. And 3 years ago, after my wife Elena lost her fight with cancer, the house turned quiet in a way that felt wrong, like the walls were holding their breath. So I sold the place, took what was left of me, and moved to Juniper Hollow Estates, a planned community outside Phoenix, the kind of place with perfect lawns and smiles that don't reach the eyes. The lot I bought was weird, an old surveying mistake from the 1960s, an L-shaped boundary nobody cared about, or at least nobody cared about until I did, because Elena had always dreamed about wine country. And if you've ever loved someone like that, you know you start building their dreams even after they're gone, just so the world can't pretend they never existed. So I spent 18 months turning dust into a memorial. Soil prep, custom irrigation, premium Cabernet, and Pinot Noir vines. And when I scattered Elena's ashes between those rows, I wasn't planting grapes. I was planting a promise. Then Constance Holloway slithered into the picture, driving her white SUV slow past my property like a shark with a mortgage, measuring grass like it owed her money, issuing violations like confetti, pushing people until they sold, then swooping in with her real estate license to help find the right buyers. I watched her do it to an elderly widow with garden gnomes, to a young family whose toddlers laughed after dinner, to anyone who didn't fit her neat little vision of who deserved to live there. And then the certified letter came. Tuesday morning, coffee steam fogging the window as I read words that felt like they'd been typed with ice. Agricultural use violation, no commercial farming, $500 per day, remove immediately. I called her office, told her it wasn't commercial, it was a memorial, and she hit me with the line I still hear in my head sometimes, the one that turned my grief into anger. I don't care if it's a memorial to a saint. Agriculture lowers property values and attracts the wrong element. Wrong element. Like my wife's ashes were a nuisance and I was a stain. 2 weeks, she said, or they'd remove it for me. And right there, something in me clicked into that old training. Not rage swinging wild, but rage sharpening into a plan. Because combat engineers don't just blow things up. We find the beam that holds the whole ugly structure together, and we pull it. That night, I spread every document from closing across my table like blueprints, deed, survey, title insurance, the boring papers most people forget. And in the morning, I called the county recorder for every survey tied to Juniper Hollow Estates. Because dictators hate one thing more than rebellion. They hate receipts. Thursday night came. The guild called an emergency meeting to publicly execute my vineyard, and I walked into that beige room outnumbered. Constance at the front with a PowerPoint about preserving community standards, projecting photos of my healthy vines like they were evidence of a crime scene. And when I stood and said, calmly, that I hadn't sold a single grape, that this was my wife's memorial, she smiled like a freezer door closing and told me intent didn't matter, the appearance violated their rules. They voted against me, 4-1. Only Jake Mercer, a retired teacher and the guild treasurer, looked sorry, and when the room emptied, he slid me a business card like contraband and whispered, call me. There's stuff she doesn't want you to know. I nodded, but I was already digging, because the sweetest revenge doesn't start with yelling, it starts with paperwork. Friday morning I stood inside the county recorder's office, that fluorescent-lit mausoleum of old files and older patients, and a board clerk dropped a thick folder on the counter like she was handing me a brick. Inside was the original 1965 survey, brittle paper, yellowed lines, and I traced the boundaries with the same focus I used to trace bridges and berms overseas. And that's when I saw it. The quiet little detail that changed everything, a pre-existing utility easement and boundary. Description recorded decades before the guild ever existed. running straight through what they now called common area, the clean strip of land where they hosted barbecues, yoga, meetings, and where Constance parked like she owned the sun. Technically, that ground belonged to me. I called Sienna Park, an attorney Jake Mercer recommended, paid for a consult, and the moment she saw the dates her expression softened into that professional hunger lawyers get when the law is finally on the side of the person who's been shoved around. She told me the easement predated the guild by over 20 years. They couldn't restrict my use like that. And she said something else, almost casually, while cross-referencing the old map with newer property lines. By the way, their clubhouse footprint looks like it crosses into your deeded boundaries. I felt my throat go dry, because that wasn't just a defense, that was the support beam. While Constance was obsessing over my vines, she'd been ruling her little empire from a building that might not even be on guild land. So I hired an official survey firm, Hawthorne and Pike Surveying, the kind the county trusts in disputes, and when their report arrived, it was like opening a treasure map written in legal ink. It wasn't just a corner, it wasn't just a few feet. According to the original lines, I owned a brutal slice of their prized amenities, part of the clubhouse, portions of the pool deck, a storage shed, parking spaces, and a stretch of event lawn where they held mandatory gatherings like suburban sermons. And the worst, funniest, most infuriating part, I'd been paying property taxes on it, year after year, while they collected fees to maintain their common space on land that wasn't theirs. Sienna laid out the options like cards, injunction, civil suit, unjust enrichment, fraud referral, personal liability for board members, and I could have dropped the hammer right then, but I didn't, because Constance wasn't just attacking my vines. She was escalating into something that begged for a clean, public, undeniable end. So I made a decision that felt cold even to me. I'd let her step fully into the trap, on camera, with witnesses. Meanwhile, she went feral, daily inspections at dawn, nonsense violations, sprinkler minutes, hose visibility, mailbox typography, the petty stuff weaponized, and she pressured neighbors into filing noise complaints about my irrigation. Some of them looked ashamed, like they were signing under threat, so I installed cameras, lots of them, not for paranoia, for documentation. And those cameras caught her doing the one thing she claimed to worship above all else, property rights. She crossed onto my land at night to photograph my vineyard, again and again, trespass wrapped in righteousness. Then the coalition formed, not loud at first, just tired people quietly bringing binders. Mrs. Lorna Peck, the widow with the gnomes, showed me years of citations so absurd they sounded like parody. A young couple, Diego and Marisol Santos, had recordings, complaints, intimidation, and Carmen Vale, a retired teacher with a spine of steel, had audio that made my stomach flip. Constance talking about certain families needing enhanced oversight, coded language turning into something uglier, something that smelled like discrimination. And Jake Mercer brought the financial records, invoices, contracts funneled to Constance's husband's landscaping company. To relatives, no bidding, no transparency, money siphoned out of community dues like a slow bleed. By then, this wasn't just my memorial. This was a pattern, a system, a racket. She tried to bankrupt me with a special restoration assessment, threatened foreclosure, spread rumors that I was poisoning groundwater. And then, in the middle of the night, my cameras caught her committing the kind of crime that stops being suburban drama and starts being real. She crept in wearing dark clothes, carrying herbicide, poisoning a dozen vines, destroying months of life in minutes, and I didn't run outside. I didn't confront her. I let the cameras drink in every second, because sometimes justice needs proof more than it needs shouting. The final move came at dawn when she filed a false police report claiming I threatened her. And that's when Sheriff Raul Martinez called me, calm but sharp, and I told him I had footage covering every inch of my property, and he told me to bring it, because false reports aren't HOA business, they're felonies. Tuesday morning arrived, and Constance Holloway showed up with an excavator, smiling like she was about to win an Oscar for Most Dedicated Community Leader, and the diesel engine's rumble rolled through the neighborhood like thunder. Neighbors gathered, phones out, and she even live-streamed it to the guild page, narrating my destruction like a victory speech. I walked outside in my robe, played desperate, begged for one more week to harvest. She loved that. You could see it. Power does that to people. It makes them hungry for the moment you kneel. The bucket tore into the soil, grape clusters burst, purple juice smeared the concrete like spilled wine, the air filled with diesel and sweetness, and something that felt like my chest being scraped hollow. 18 months of work, my wife's living memorial, being turned into sludge while Constance Holloway smiled into her phone and told the world this was what happens when residents think they're above the rules. And then, right on cue, patrol lights flashed at the end of the street. Sheriff Raul Martinez stepped out, surveyed the damage, the crowd, the live stream, the heavy machinery sitting on my land, and he asked her for the authority to excavate. She puffed up, introduced herself as guild chair, waved violation notices like royal decrees, and the sheriff, steady as stone, asked the simplest question in the world, the one that destroys liars every time. Who owns the property you're standing on? She said my name, like that settled it, and the sheriff turned to me and asked for the documents we discussed. So I handed him the folder, deed, survey, tax records, certified maps, the kind of paper that doesn't care about blazers or tone or tantrums. And he read for a few minutes while the neighborhood held its breath. The excavator operator stared at the ground like he wished he could meld into it. And Constance kept streaming, because she still thought the camera was her ally. Then Sheriff Martinez looked up and asked the question that hit her like a car crash in slow motion. Ma'am, who gave your Canyon Ridge Homeowners Guild permission to build that clubhouse on Miles Tatum's property? Her face drained so fast, it was almost comical, like someone pulled the plug on her confidence. She stammered, called it impossible, claimed the clubhouse was on common area, and the sheriff lifted the certified survey like a judge lifting a sentence, official county records, old boundaries, current tax rolls, and suddenly her live stream comments started changing, from cheering to confusion to panic. Because regular people understand one thing instantly: if you're standing on land you don't own, you don't get to play dictator there. That's when the rest of the truth piled on. Jake Mercer stepped forward with the financial contracts. Sienna Park arrived with legal filings ready like a blade. The excavator operator confessed she'd offered him cash to accidentally do extra damage, and my cameras had the midnight herbicide sabotage, and the false police report, and the trespass, and the sheriff didn't hesitate, because at some point community standards stops being a hobby and starts being criminal. He cuffed her right there, in front of her own live stream, in front of neighbors she'd bullied for years, and I watched the woman who had lived off intimidation suddenly look small, not because the cuffs are magical, but because truth is heavier than any excavator. I said one sentence, not loud, just clear, the kind you say when you're finally done carrying someone else's cruelty. Next time you try to destroy a dead woman's memorial, maybe make sure you actually own the ground you're standing on. The crowd reacted like a dam breaking, applause, laughter, relief. And in the middle of that noise, I felt something I hadn't felt since Elena died. Not happiness exactly, but breath, like I could inhale without pain for the first time in a long time. After that, the fallout came fast and clean. Emergency guild meeting. Jake Mercer installed as interim chair, contracts published, enforcement frozen pending review. The clubhouse land dispute moved into court with paperwork so ugly it couldn't be ignored. Constance Holloway faced charges for trespass, vandalism, false reporting, and the broader fraud and enrichment claims followed like wolves. Her real estate license got suspended. Her family's businesses lost contracts. The perfect house went on the market, and for the first time in decades, people in Juniper Hollow Estates walked outside without feeling like they were being watched. My vineyard took damage, real damage, but I still harvested what survived. And the irony is adversity concentrates the sugar. The first vintage I bottled carried a bite and a sweetness that felt like a story. I labeled it Justice Reserve, and with the settlement money, I did the thing that felt most like Elena. I turned the destroyed section into a community memorial garden, raised beds, benches, herbs, fruit trees, kids laughing where laughter used to be a violation, neighbors planting side by side like we were repairing something bigger than landscaping. I framed the written apology and put it beside Elena's photo, not because paper fixes grief, but because it proves the world can be corrected when people stop looking away. And now, with the clubhouse rebuilt legally, with transparency rules in place, with residents finally protected instead of preyed on, I can say this story ends with closure, not because everything became perfect, but because the bully lost, the stolen ground came back to its owner, and my wife's memorial didn't get erased. It got expanded into something that feeds people. But I still think about it, late at night, when the vineyard is quiet and the air smells like leaves and dust and memory. And I want to ask you the same question I asked myself when the excavator bucket hovered over those vines. If someone used the rules as a weapon to destroy the thing you loved most, and you had a chance to set the trap that would ruin them publicly and legally, would you call that justice, or would you call it revenge? And where's the line between the two? Morally, humanly, honestly?